Good afternoon and welcome to our fifth NHLBI Small Biz Hangout and the first in our new business-focused series, Writing Your Phase 2 SBIR Commercialization Plan. Today's presenter is Dr. Gary Robinson, the Business Development Specialist at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute's Office of Translational Alliances and Coordination, otherwise known as OTAC. My name is Chris Sasiella, and I am a Regulatory Specialist in OTAC, and I will be moderating today's Hangout. Our Hangouts are designed to be interactive. So if you have questions at any point throughout the presentation, feel free to ask them. We'll be sharing a little bit more about that in just a moment. The Office of Translational Alliances and Coordination has developed the Small Biz Hangout series as an interactive way to provide biomedical innovators with information in the non-scientific disciplines that all entrepreneurs need to learn as they develop their technologies and grow their businesses. The topic of today's Hangout will be Writing Your Phase 2 SBIR Commercialization Plan. SBIR and STTR applications with a Phase 2 component require a commercialization plan, a description of how the company plans to bring its innovative technology to market. This afternoon, Dr. Robinson will talk about how to address several key elements of this plan. As I mentioned, our Hangouts are designed to be interactive. If you have questions at any point throughout the presentation, you can ask them in one of three ways. You can either post your questions to the Google Plus Hangout page if you are watching on Google Plus, or you can post your questions on Twitter using the hashtag SBIRchat, or you can direct message our office at the Twitter handle NHLBI_SBIR. Before he gets started with his presentation, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my colleague. Gary joined OTAC in June 2014 and brought with him a 20-plus year history of product research, commercialization, and business development experience in the life science field. He has co-founded a company, held the role of Chief Business Officer, and has been an instrumental team member in the business and corporate development groups of companies focused in cancer, HIV, and diagnostics space. He's also been successful in receiving SBIR funding prior to joining the government. Gary received his PhD in physical chemistry from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MS in Management of Technology from the Sloan School at MIT. He has taught graduate courses in biotechnology, business strategy, and entrepreneurship, and has been a business advisor to a number of R&D-focused technology companies. Gary is going to be sharing with us today some of the key points that he has refined in the commercialization plan development, and at this point I would like to welcome Gary, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to talk to you all today about the topic of commercializing SBIR-funded research. And before I get into the substance of the talk, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Office of Translational Alliances and Coordination, where I work as a business development advisor at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. So the NHLBI started OTAC about 4 years ago with a mission of supporting the translation of new discoveries into groundbreaking products to prevent, diagnose, and treat heart, lung, blood, and sleep disorders. And toward this end, we coordinate funding initiatives and offer a variety of resources to innovators. On the funding side, besides investigator-initiated projects submitted in response to the Omnibus NIH SBIR solicitation, the NHLBI funds research on specific topics of interest to the Institute through targeted funding announcements. These topics are listed on our SBIR webpage, and new topics are announced periodically. We provide the web URL for the NHLBI website later on in the presentation. In addition, the NHLBI has a Phase 2B SBIR program where companies that are developing products requiring regulatory approval can receive up to $3 million in funding. The NIH Centers for Accelerated Innovations is a new program that at NHLBI that supports 3 university clusters across the country to identify clinically and commercially promising technologies coming out of academic labs and supports them to advance through early proof of concept studies. We also participate in and organize several life science business-oriented conferences that provide forums for our innovators to present their company stories to potential strategic partners and investors. And these include national conferences such as AdvaMed and Bio, as well as NHLBI-run events like the Regional Innovation Conferences, otherwise known as the RIC, R-A-C. The RICs enable NHLBI-funded small businesses to, in specific regions of the country, to showcase their products and technologies to venture and angel investors, as well as more established biomedical product companies. And this gives them an opportunity to look for additional funding beyond their SBIR programs to advance their product development programs. And our 6th Regional Innovation Conference is actually coming up on March 4th in Columbus, Ohio, for awardees in the Midwest region. Finally, OTAC offers a variety of advisory services and educational services, such as these Hangouts, to innovators working within the heart, lung, blood, and sleep mission space, innovators who are interested in applying for SBIR funding or who have received awards. Besides our in-house experts, we have also developed a network of partners across several sectors of the life sciences industry that work with us to support our programs. So besides myself, there are several people on our staff at OTAC who are available to advise innovators and companies on topics relevant to the development and commercialization of their technologies. Wanted to point out Jennifer Shee, who's our small business coordinator and point person on all things small business for NHLBI. Chris Asiela, who introduced me, offers regulatory guidance on a range of product types relevant to the heart, lung, blood, and sleep mission. Gautam Prakash is a patent attorney on detail from the USPTO, who's available to advise inventors on patent filing and prosecution matters. And finally, Ram Ayar and Steve Flame, both of whom have invested in early-stage biomedical enterprises, are available to offer advice on investor pitches and post-SBIR financing strategies. So as far as I'm concerned, where I come in, I'm available to talk with prospective funding applicants as well as awardees about a variety of commercialization and business development issues they might encounter. You might think of me as a government-sponsored consultant. For clarity, though, I am only able to help companies who are operating within the NHLBI mission space. So with that introduction, I guess we'll just check to see if there are any questions, Chris, that might have come through at this point.
So I am checking our Twitter feed and the homepage, excuse me, of the Hangout, and I am not seeing any questions at this point in time, Gary. However, audience members, please feel free to tweet or post your questions at any point in time, and we will come back periodically to address them.
Great. Okay. So I just want to touch on the objectives of the webinar. I've already introduced the resources that we offer here at OTAC. I'd like to outline the Phase 2 SBIR Commercialization Plan, talk a bit about how one communicates the value proposition for a new product or technology, how one goes about conducting market and competitive research, and estimating revenues for a product, otherwise known as the market, actual market size. And also I'd like to touch on how the go-to-market strategy, how we bring products to market. And these are all key issues that one needs to address in an SBIR Phase 2 commercialization plan. I also want to just point out a couple of useful resources. There are examples of successful SBIR applications that our colleagues at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease have put up on their website, and here is an abbreviated URL for those applications. And our colleagues at the National Institute for Drug Abuse have put together some guidance on writing SBIR proposals, and those can be found at this URL here. My goal in this presentation is not to go through every facet of the commercialization plan. We don't really have that much time, but I want to highlight some key points. I feel that innovators, applicants should spend some more time, additional time, thinking about and making sure that they address thoroughly. So as Chris mentioned, commercialization plans are required for all Phase 2 proposals, whether those be follow-on from Phase 1, fast track, or direct to Phase 2 proposals. They are a maximum of 12 pages long. They can be shorter. And importantly, you can learn all about these applications and what should go into the commercialization plan from the SF424 application guide, starting on page 1-138, and URL is presented here. And I'll just remind you that you can email us at the end of this webinar, and we'd be happy to provide you with copies of the slides. We will not be posting the slides, however, on our website. So it's important to read the application guide thoroughly and understand what is being asked of you, and also if there are any specific funding opportunity announcements associated with the proposal you're submitting. It's really important to follow the guidance in those funding announcements, because they sometimes will vary from what is presented in the SF424 guide. Essentially, the commercialization plan is your way of describing the value of the product or service that you're going to develop and how you're going to bring it to market. And just for brevity here, I'm going to use the term product to refer to product and service. But whether or not the product is a tangible device or other such product, it will be the same sort of issues will apply, the same sort of advice I think will apply. So your goal here is to describe the product opportunity, what's your overall business objective, what kind of hurdles are you going to encounter along the way as you advance your product, and how are you going to achieve your goal. You can think of the commercialization plan kind of like the executive summary of a business plan focused on a specific product, and it's worthwhile thinking of the reviewers as prospective investors and ask yourself why they might want to give money to you to develop this product. The commercialization plan contributes to the significance score of the proposal. That's to say, the potential of the proposed research to lead to a marketable product that will have a beneficial impact in a field of use. And keep in mind, again, the scoring criteria may change with the specific funding opportunity that you're applying for. So with that, there are 7 components to the commercialization plan, again, as outlined in the SF424 guide, listed here. And I'm going to focus on elements 1, 3, and 6 here, the value of the project, expected outcomes and impact. Bulk of the time I'm going to spend on the market, customer, and competition section, and then finally the production and marketing plan section. If you have additional questions after this webinar, feel free to reach out to me using the email address provided at the end of the deck. The value of the project section is really where you are asked to connect the research strategy to the overall product development plan for the innovative product that you hope to develop, and then in turn how the project and the product relate to the overall business strategy of the company. We want to be able to demonstrate that the project itself is really relevant to the overall mission of the company. Keep in mind that if the product requires regulatory approval, and much of what I'm going to talk about in this hangout here relates to products that do require some kind of regulatory approval, that you should provide an outline of the clinical development plan with milestones and a timeline. And you want to describe the regulatory pathway for that product. And Chris, just as a plug for Chris, I mean, she's the regulatory expert in our office, and she's helpful if you have questions about the mechanism, the pathway for a product through the FDA. Please reach out to her, and if you have questions along those lines. Where it's appropriate, you should reference comparable products that have gone through a development and regulatory approval, review and approval process. And also, please note that for diagnostic laboratory developed tests, even though many of us consider these to be offered independent of FDA oversight, in fact, the FDA is putting out new sets of regulations relating to these tests. And if you're proposing to develop and commercialize such a test, you really should show that you understand the current and pending FDA regulations. So moving on to Section 3, the Market, Customer, and Competition section. Again, I'm going to focus most of my attention in here on products that will go through a regulatory process, although most of the considerations here apply to research tool products that don't require a regulatory oversight. The ultimate customers for any product are the patients and physicians, and then to a secondary extent also the payers, the folks who actually reimburse those the physicians for the work. As well as the pharmaceutical companies for the drugs that they provide, etc. Since the patients are really the people suffering from the disease, they're the people who are the ultimate indicator of whether the product is helpful or beneficial, we need to think carefully about them, understand them as a distinct sort of market segment. We want to ask the question of how the disease is diagnosed and treated. Many diseases are diagnosed in stages where the severity of the symptoms reflect the progression of the underlying disease biology, and patients in different stages are diagnosed and treated differently. So we want to talk about how the stages of the disease are managed. What in fact are the major diagnostic and treatment needs for patients, either across all the stages or within specific stages of disease, and then how many patients have the disease and the percentage at each stage. And the key statistical numbers here are the incidence and the prevalence, the incidence being the total number of patients who are diagnosed per year with a disorder, and the prevalence being the total number of people living with the disease or disorder. And there are situations when the incidence numbers are not accurate because there are patients who actually aren't diagnosed. So that's another component of this equation that you want to keep in mind. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease is a good example of a disease that manifests itself in different stages. And the diagnostic criteria and treatment options will vary depending on the stage or severity of the disease. And I'm showing that here, 4 different stages with different diagnostic criteria and different treatment options. And this is just an example of how one needs to think about the stages of the disease and the patient's needs within each stage of the disease. The other side of the customer equation is the doctors and the payers, and it's important to know what kinds of physician specialists diagnose and treat the disease and how they make money. Is it primarily through office visits or is it through procedures? Your product, the new product, would need to fit into a diagnostic and treatment sort of algorithm. And it's important then to understand whether you are enhancing sort of in addition to providing benefit to the patients, how are you going to affect the way the doctors conduct their business? Where is the disease diagnosed and treated? For example, cardiac catheterizations to image arterial blockages. Those are done in hospitals. Of course, we're all familiar with oral medications that we get from a pharmacy and take at home. Biologic therapies, protein-based therapies, are infused in doctors' offices. So depending on where the disease is treated, different people will be involved in the buying decision and the actual purchasing of the product. It's important to recognize that, again, when you're creating a story for your product. And then finally, is the product covered by insurance? If so, who's paid? Not every product is going to be covered by insurance. Certainly research tools, as we discussed earlier, are not. But even many laboratory-developed tests are not covered by insurance, and so you're expecting the patient to pick up the cost of that. That's an important consideration when you're sort of making the case for the overall cost-benefit of your new technology. So we've talked a bit about the customers. The other important facet of the story is the product itself, obviously. So we need to understand what is the value of the underlying product, relative to the standard of care. I mean, the objective for any treatment is to reduce mortality and morbidity and to improve quality of life, but we need to translate that into specific product benefits. For instance, for a therapeutic, is there improved efficacy compared to the standard of care? Is the new approach safer? Is it easier for the patient to take the product, the drug, let's say? Is it an oral versus an injectable drug? Or are you able to improve or reduce the dosing frequency to make it easier for the patient to comply with treatment? On the diagnostic side, some benefits to consider are shorter time to making a decision, improved accuracy, lower complexity of a test, and non-invasiveness. So an intravenous blood draw is going to be more invasive than a finger prick, and a sweat measurement from a finger is better than a finger prick, less invasive than a finger prick. So there's kinds of things that obviously you want to be considering, and these figure into the overall calculus of benefit. Now, you're always operating within constraints in the biomedical world, and first and foremost, there are the regulatory requirements you have to meet to get a product on the market. You have clinical management guidelines that doctors learn and that evolve on a somewhat regular basis and are put forth by disease or physician specialty disease-focused medical societies. Physician habits are also an important thing to keep in mind when you're trying to get a physician to do something differently from what he or she has been doing already. It requires education and convincing. And then, of course, the benefits versus the costs are a very important consideration as well. Now, the benefits associated with a particular product will vary depending on what the product is going to do for you. And I've got three categories of product that I think capture the spectrum of possibilities. The diagnostic, in the first case, the diagnostic or therapeutic product will supplement an existing approach. In the second case, it would replace an existing approach. And third, it would diagnose or treat a previously undiagnosed or untreated condition. And the sort of criteria for success in all of those, in those three situations, differ from one another, and the expectations with regard to benefits and costs are also going to vary from one category to the other. So taking first the case where you're, say, supplementing an existing diagnostic test, and an example might be combining optical spectroscopy with intravascular ultrasound to image arterial plaques. The standard of care is intravascular ultrasound for getting an idea of the mass, the size of the obstruction. Optical spectroscopy can give you more information about the plaque, for instance, chemical composition. But the key question is, will the information actually enable a decision by the physician? If not, then maybe the information is superfluous. Or maybe you need to you have a big job in your hands in trying to shift the approach to diagnosing plaques. A key issue, will the physicians be willing to rely on this test? Are the data sufficiently robust that they're going to move the needle on how the physician makes decisions? And then, of course, will the test be reimbursed, and if so, how? So a lot of us think of Diagnostic tests, again, is being great. The more information, the better, but information without context is not always great. So keep that in mind. Another example, replacing an existing therapeutic approach, factor Xa inhibitors, orally available factor Xa inhibitors versus heparin for preventing blood clots, otherwise known in the medical lingo as venous thromboembolism, in patients that are undergoing hip or knee replacement surgery. So here I've sort of selected a few key characteristics, benefit characteristics of low molecular weight heparins versus factor Xa inhibitors. There are many ways and parameters in which these products are being compared to one another. The first factor Xa inhibitor was actually just approved a few years ago, so this space is evolving in real time. But when you look across the spectrum of benefits and risks, it's a mixed bag. So factor Xa inhibitors do, by and large, according to the clinical studies, do a better job of preventing clots. They're easier to administer. They're taken orally rather than being injected. And the pharmacokinetics of onset are much more predictable compared to heparin. On the other hand, the bleeding risk for factor Xa inhibitors is somewhat higher than for heparin. So depending on what is more important here, clot prevention or bleeding risk, the doctor may make a decision, and it could be a relatively subjective decision within the constraints of the data. Recognizing what the standard of care is and what people think, what physicians think about the relative benefits of one approach versus the other is really important in being able to make the case, again, for your new product and where it will fit into the overall picture. Finally, treating a previously untreated condition, and an example that I've chosen here are PCSK9 inhibitors, a new class of inhibitors that are in development, not yet approved for high LDL cholesterol in patients who either can't tolerate statins or who have a hereditary predisposition to high cholesterol. And in this situation, the standard of care is just statin. Well, there's really no standard of care for people who can't tolerate statins because they just don't take them. So there's really nothing there, which in a sense is a lower bar, but you still have issues around the benefits versus the safety concerns. If 1 out of 10 people, for instance, just completely hypothetically, were to suffer a serious adverse event, then probably the drug, even the benefits, are not going to outweigh the safety concerns. And then, of course, do the benefits justify the costs associated with these drugs? Are going to be, the initial round of PCSK9 inhibitors are going to be biologics, so they're going to be costly and they're going to require infusion as compared to statins, which are taken orally. So we have another opportunity to field some questions. I don't know if any have come in yet.
Yes, actually, Gary, we have one question that's come in thus far, and the question reads, for a disease or condition that currently has no therapy, how do you estimate an acceptable cost or a reimbursement paradigm?
That's a great question, and I'm going to get to that a bit later on, but essentially you need to kind of consider the cost of treating that patient has some kind of treatment there's some kind of treatment the patient is undergoing. They're not just sitting there with their disease. So there's a cost either in doctor's visits, diagnostic testing, or other interventions that are not successful that you are going to be essentially displacing. And so you want to think about the net cost of all those other interventions that are not really helping out versus what you're going to bring on the market. And you can use that as a benchmark. There are ways also, as you progress with your product development, to do surveys where you actually talk to doctors to get a more fine-grained sense of the cost-benefit ratio. There are also, at some point, you need to enter into discussions with payers and recommend actually looking at the case of Sovaldi, the Gilead drug for Hep C, and the controversy sort of swirling around that because of the pricing of that drug. And basically Gilead's response to a lot of this is, well, hepatitis C right now is not curable, and patients have to undergo some pretty nasty treatments And so we have the prospect of actually curing patients. What is that worth? And they actually present a pharmacoeconomic analysis along those lines. So that's how I would answer it at this point.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's the only question we have at this point.
Okay. So moving on, the competitive landscape is sort of a key element in all of this, as you've kind of gathered in evaluating where your product stands vis-a-vis the rest of the, you know, in the overall scheme of things, and what sort of promise it offers. And so you want a proper understanding of the, or evaluation of the competitive landscape is really key to understanding the market opportunity as a whole. So you want to have a decent grasp of the strengths and weaknesses of both marketed and investigational products, and you can get that through publications and conversations with various stakeholders, as well as surveys. And you likewise want to get have an idea of the clinical development and regulatory hurdles that current drugs in development are facing or have faced, so that you can benchmark your product versus those. And then, of course, you also want to know when the patents on the currently marketed and investigational drugs will expire, that the commercial exclusivity will go away largely when those patents expire, and when your drug or product diagnostic test will launch relative to the expiries of those competing products, as well as the patent expiry of your product. And essentially, you're really trying to answer the question, what value are the competitors leaving on the table here? And as an example, coming back to antithrombotics, it's a pretty crowded development field right now. This is a snapshot of drugs in development as of last year, and antithrombotics cover a variety of different chemical classes, means of delivery, different indications. We mentioned blood clot prevention in patients undergoing orthopedic surgery. There's also stroke prevention and other applications. So you know, this is an example of a pretty crowded field, but I'm putting it here just so you kind of understand how to go about thinking about the competitive landscape when you're analyzing an opportunity for a new product. Excuse me. So one of the things you're asked to do in your commercialization plan, or indeed in any business plan, is to estimate the market size, or really what's essentially the product sales revenues for the product that you're developing. And there are a couple of different ways of doing that, and I'm going to describe those here. There's the forward calculating method, which is preferred because it's more rigorous, and where you would start with the number of patients with a specific need. You try to understand or analyze the segment of that population that whose need is addressed by the product. So in other words, does the new product treat or diagnose all of the patients with the problem, or just a subset? And that number is your addressable market. That's in terms of numbers of patients. You would then assume an empirically reasonable time-dependent rate of market penetration, and you can use information on comparable products that have come to market over the years to get that. You could also look at a range of numbers. It's always good to kind of think about a range from a small number to a somewhat higher number to give the boundary conditions here. And then you would estimate a price using the current cost per year, let's say, to diagnose or treat patients as a basis. And where there is no comparable product as per the previous question, you again could use that as a variable. Consider the price to be a variable and look at the numbers that come out. And then the revenues are simply the accessible market times the price. In a somewhat more sophisticated approach, you would consider the penetration rate to vary over time, maybe in an S-curve type of shape. starting out small, ramping up, and then maybe leveling off as more competitors come into the mix, and then trailing off as patents expire. And there are examples of those kinds of penetration rate functions out there. But I think for purposes of your commercialization plan, getting a sense of, let's say, the initial the sales revenues over the first few years is probably a reasonable approach, and perhaps what you might anticipate to be the peak revenues for the product. So as an illustrative example here, I've taken again a case of an antithrombotic factor Xa inhibitor for preventing blood clots. There are about 770 knee and hip replacements that are done in the U.S. per year. If we estimate the cost of perioperative treatment, which is sort of prophylactic treatment with a factor Xa inhibitor, to be about $500, which is the approximate cost of the approved drug rivaroxaban, then the addressable U.S. market is about $385 million, and you can assume, let's say, a 5 to 25% range, and you get an accessible U.S. market of $20 to $100 million. So this is an example of a calculation that would be suitable in a commercialization plan for estimating revenues and market size. You can also calculate backward, knowing what products are currently on the market and what sales are for those products, and then considering what products are currently in development that are going to kind of poach some of that market share away from the existing products, and then use empirical data to make a case for the anticipated price and market penetration. And here's an example for the antithrombotic drug market from last year, showing an overall market of about $24 billion in the U.S. in 2013, broken up among these different classes, and different classes of drugs, as I pointed out in the table earlier, have different indications, different therapeutic applications, and then an expansion of the overall market to about $26 billion in 2018. But what's interesting here is that the low molecular weight heparins, represented by the purple or violet here, are anticipated to go down from 28% to 18% over that 5-year period, whereas the factor Xa inhibitors, which are competing directly with the heparins, are predicted to expand from a 10% to a 33% market share. And so these kinds of data are useful in the back calculation approach to market size and revenues. I want to talk a bit also about how one goes about doing market research for the commercialization plan and for a business plan. So you have a variety of resources, some of which cost money and others are free. There are a number of market research consultancies that put out detailed market research reports based on surveys that they conduct and research they conduct. Those usually cost money. And unless you pay them, you're not going to get access to them, but libraries may sometimes have subscriptions. There are also local economic development authorities that might get subscriptions, and those development authorities support local entrepreneurs by providing free access to those entrepreneurs. So you might take a look at that. Clinical trial designs and FDA approvals are available on government websites. There are trade journals, free to everyone. A couple of examples listed here. Company press releases, of course, it's great to monitor the progress of companies in the field to get a sense of where the overall field is moving. The scientific and medical literature, listed a few publications here. Medscape and Nature Reviews, in particular, are great sources for information on clinical management guidelines and markets within the life sciences space. You've got several different epidemiology databases, including the World Health Organization database, the Centers for Disease Control, and the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, which is a great resource for non-infectious disease epidemiology. Different disease advocacy groups like the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, and American Thoracic Society put out reports and also promulgate guidelines, their treatment guidelines for physicians in their fields. You could also find guidelines on the website guidelines.gov. Public companies are required to disclose material events in their company's daily lives to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, and those are all publicly available. And then there are reports put together by stock market analysts on companies as well as industry sectors. Those also typically cost money, but there may be ways through reaching out to different analysts to actually get copies of those. There's no substitute for primary research. Obviously, most small entrepreneurial companies don't have the resources to do detailed primary market research early on. It becomes pretty important to do that, though, once you're in a phase 2 clinical development. There are some kind of smaller scale primary research studies that you can do, however, and namely talking with doctors, especially key opinion leaders in a field, those who are running the clinical trials on emerging drugs, asking them what the current clinical management paradigm is and where they see the greatest needs being. And although not everyone may be interested or willing to talk, there'll plenty of folks out there who are interested in seeing the field advance and would be happy to talk to entrepreneurs developing new products. Patients, of course, are also a great resource, and there are, as one moves on in clinical development, you'll want to engage in more formal market research studies where you pull together panels of physicians or patients and conduct perhaps online surveys. And there are consulting organizations that actually specialize in this kind of work, so not companies themselves don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel. And we have another question and answer opportunity if any additional questions have come through.
We do have one additional question that's come through thus far. I know that we have quite an active viewing audience, so I'd like to just remind you that you can post your questions on the Google Plus Hangout page, or you can tweet your questions using the hashtag SBIRCHAT, SBIR chat. We'll be happy to address them. But the one that's come in thus far is, where do you find patent expiration dates, or what patent covers a specific product?
Well, the United States Patent and Trademark Office has a database that's open and available to the public, and actually probably should have had that as a list of one of the market research tools. So you go to uspto.gov, and you can search by inventor, by title of application, by technology type, and the expiration date. Any patent that's been filed, I forget exactly, we're starting in the mid to late 1990s, has a 20-year lifespan from the date of filing. Patents that were filed earlier than that have a 17-year lifespan from the date of allowance, but those patents are pretty much running out of steam at this point anyway. So basically it's 20 years from the date of filing, and you have the filing date actually listed on the top of the patent application for you to see. That's for the USPTO. There's also the there's a world patent database called WIPO, W-I-P-O, and you can search that database as well for non-US patent applications. The final section of the commercialization plan that I wanted to discuss was the production and marketing plan. There's some information that's being requested in this section according to the SF424 guide, which seems to overlap with information that is requested in Section 3 on the market, customer, and competition. I think as long as you address provide the information that's requested, you're fine. It doesn't really matter necessarily where you put it. I view the production and marketing plan section more as the go-to-market strategy section, or how you get the product into the hands of the end users, not so much how you analyze the market opportunity. I leave that analysis to that section 3. And essentially, you're being asked to explain, once the SBIR project is completed, how will you further develop and manufacture the product, and then how will you market and sell the product. Fairly straightforward, but not always straightforward in terms of options. We have lots of different possibilities, especially if a company is virtual, as to how we're going to go about doing this. And you want to take the time to explain your strategy in your application and demonstrate to the reviewers that you have a clear idea of how it will eventually get in the hands of a customer who's going to pay money. So when you're thinking about the resources for moving products forward and commercializing, of course you have your in-house talent, academic collaborators, consultants, contract research development and manufacturing companies, strategic partners, and promotional partners. When you're describing your plan, I mean, the plan is obviously individual. It depends entirely on the product you're developing. You want to talk about who's going to be doing the work and why you've chosen a particular route to doing the work. For instance, if you want to keep the fundamental science in-house, but you want to outsource some of the preclinical GLP preclinical work in the lead up to an IND filing, and you want to outsource the management of the clinical trials, well, you explain that. It'd be good also to include letters of support from the key collaborators that you're going to be working with, if you know who they are. In all cases, even when you're outsourcing a lot of the work, you still need someone in-house who's going to be managing, overseeing these projects. So keep that in mind. But in some cases, you may have collaborators already set up. You may already even have a strategic partner or a commitment from a strategic partner. You should, in that case, include documentation that these folks are committed to working with you. It demonstrates, again, to the reviewers that you've really thought through the whole process. Some things to keep in mind when you're organizing, you're thinking about your production and marketing plan for your business, and then translating that into a commercialization plan for an SBIR, because of course the commercialization plan for the SBIR should just be a reflection of what you've already decided you're going to be doing for the company. Sometimes we haven't thought it all the way through, and so this is an opportunity to really put some time into thinking it through and making it clear, at least in your own heads, and then for the reviewers. So the patient population that you're going to study in your clinical trials, at least your phase 3 pivotal clinical trials, are going to be your initial target market. Those are the people that are going to be benefiting. The patients are going to be benefiting initially from your product. You may expand beyond that later, but that's your initial market. And so your clinical development plan and your market analysis should match up with each other. Manufacturing is not just something that's done to make and sell a product. It's also part of the development process, since you need to make stuff in order to test it to determine if it's working the way you want it to work. As I've said already, but it bears repeating, everything you're going to do post this, almost certainly everything you're going to do post SBIR on the clinical development, manufacturing, marketing, and sales side is regulated by the FDA. So you need to have a strategy for working with the FDA and moving a product forward through FDA review and approval. When products are reimbursed, we talked about reimbursement from payers, the end users are not necessarily people that are buying the product from you. For instance, if an insurance company, if you're let's say a patient buying a product at a pharmacy, you're not paying the pharmaceutical company. You're paying the pharmacy, who then pays the distributor, who pays maybe yet another distributor, who pays the pharmaceutical company. And so when you think about the whole idea of sales, at least for when it comes to medical products, it's important to know if you're going to get into selling, and many small companies are happy to kind of leave that to a strategic partner. But if you're thinking about selling, you want to know who you're actually going to be selling to. And then another point that I think bears some mention is that marketing is not just advertising. And I think I'll try to make that a little clearer here. It's really an iterative process, and I think people who are comfortable with science and scientific research are comfortable with the process of marketing and market research, because it's all driven by empirical evidence and deduction. We, unlike say, computer products, we don't have the benefit of being able to design a product and know how it's going to perform, or be able to make it according to the design and expect it's going to perform a certain way, because we don't know how the body is going to respond. Human biology is still a big puzzle in many respects. And so we have to learn about the product through research and development. We start out with a product profile, what we would like the product to do, and we do studies that either confirm or refute those assumptions, and we go back and we refine the product profile. So at the end of the day, hopefully you have a product that has not taken too many hits in terms of drawbacks and still retains some key benefits that distinguish it from the rest of the pack and confer real benefit to patients and physicians and payers. And to really understand how that product is going to work in the context of for the patient, doctors, and payers, you need to do some kind of market research. That whole process, that whole iterative process, helps you to develop and refine a message or a value proposition for the product. So this product is, for instance, product A is an oral drug for disease B that's taken once a day, minimal side effects, and patients were able to see a better result at the end of 20 days than patients on competing product. That ultimately, at the end of the day, that's your product profile, and you then create a brand around that and educate your customers around that product profile. I just want to point out that although small companies often think about everything beyond a certain stage of clinical development, it's something that they would rather someone else take care of, there is a part of this whole process of marketing that you may want to consider keeping internally, because it really helps you to define the brand, and a lot of times the underlying science and technology which you're expert at, it should get translated into the brand and into the overall message. And so you may want to play a role in that process and stay involved along the way. Now, in terms of, as I mentioned, many of us in small companies are interested in moving products through one stage of development and then handing them off to another party, and that's typically done through a license agreement in the context of a partnership. And in a license, you're granting another party rights to develop, make, or sell your product in return for payments. But you're not just getting payments, you're also getting access to a lot of deep expertise on the part from the pharmaceutical partner or device partner or diagnostic partner, wherever they may be. That's valuable. Obviously, you're going to learn from those folks as well. And partnerships can run the gamut from a simple license where you essentially just hand off the product to the licensee and say, good luck, send me a check when you reach certain milestones. That's less common, I think, nowadays than more collaborative kinds of arrangements where the innovator company has a role in developing the product alongside the larger partner, or they may promote it together and they may split up the territories in which they have responsibility for promoting. So one party may have the US and the other party might have the EU, and then maybe even a third party might have Asia. The earlier you hand off the product or enter into any partnership, the lower the payments you're going to be getting from that deal, because you've put less in and the partner is going to be putting more in along the way. How you decide, or what point you decide to hand off the product, is really a corporate strategic decision, and it depends on how much value you would like to retain in the product, how involved you want to be in later stage development and ultimately commercialization, and whether there are certain competencies that you want to grow within your company that you can only do if you stay involved in later stage development and commercialization. Keep in mind, though, of course, that you need money if you're going to put skin in the game, so to speak, to get involved in development on an ongoing basis. You need to have money to do that. So you have to have an independent financing strategy beyond what the company, what the partner is providing to you in terms of funds. And with that, we have reached the end of our my slide deck. So I'm available now to answer any and all questions that might come through.
Okay, and yet again, we have one more question for you, Gary. And our most recent question is, how is the commercialization plan best handled when two companies are collaborating in a phase 2 project?
Well, one of the companies is going to be the prime contractor. The application is submitted under the name of one company. That's the company that presumably owns the technology, has rights to the technology, and so they're primarily responsible for the commercialization. It's unclear from the question whether you've already worked out with this collaborator some kind of co-commercialization arrangement, or whether you're just developing the product together. But the prime contractor, the prime applicant needs to have a story for how they are going to move it forward. If part of that involves working with a collaborator, then that's fine, and that collaborator might be involved on the development side. But then you still need to think about the ultimate sort of commercialization of the product. If let's say you've entered into a strategic partnership with a bigger company, and they have the ability to, and they've agreed to sort of move the product through commercialization, then you would just outline that in your commercialization plan.
Okay, great. And we also have another question that's just come in. How valuable is it to have a scientific advisory board in place as opposed to having a plan to establish one?
It's good whether you have a formal scientific advisory board or not. It's good to have folks on your roster who are noted experts in a field that you can point to reviewers. Reviewers do pay attention to the range of expertise, the depth of expertise in a company, and what you're able to tap into. So if you're moving into into a pulmonary disease area, and your expertise is primarily on the biology side and maybe some chemistry, you want to have a pulmonary doc, probably a pulmonary doc who's reasonably well known, who's been involved in clinical trials on new drugs, as an advisor. And you can, the kinds of arrangements you can make with those people are varied. I mean, you could just have an informal kind of agreement where they're going to provide ad hoc advice. You may want to enter into an actual scientific advisory board member agreement, which can get a bit complicated because there are conflict of interest issues that if it's a professor that they have to deal with their academic institution. But long story short, it's good to have people involved in the project, whether or not they are formally on your SAB.
Great. Let me just check one more time, and that is all of the questions that we have at this point in time.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do now is I am going to share some information with our viewing audience. We love feedback, and we're really hoping that you have enjoyed and learned from today's presentation. We would love to hear from you. What we've done is we've set up a website where you can provide us some feedback on this Hangout. You can propose topics for future Hangouts, and you can request a copy of today's slides. So the link is here on this slide that I've got out right now. It's http://bit.ly/hangout feedback. We'd love to hear from you, and we appreciate your taking the time to let us know how we're doing. Our next Hangout will happen on March 17th at 2 p.m. and is going to be a panel discussion among a number of NHLBI SBIR awardees. It's going to focus on choosing the right regulatory consultant for your stage of technology development. In mid-April, we're also going to have another business-focused hangout that's going to be an overview of intellectual property basics for the new innovator, and that will be presented by our USPTO detailee, Dr. Gautam Prakash. In May, we'll be back with another business-focused session, so please stay tuned for more information about our upcoming events. I'd also like to remind our viewing audience that we do have a number of archived events already on the NHLBI YouTube channel that are focused on regulatory areas. And you can find them as well as this once it is posted as an archived event by doing a simple Google search using the stream NHLBI Small Biz Hangout. To stay in touch with us, feel free to give us a call, send us an email, check out our website, follow us on Twitter, or sign up for our listserv, or any and all of the above. As I said before, we really do view this as an interactive dialogue to span the full spectrum of your product and technology development work. The Small Biz Hangouts are organized and presented by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, Office of Translational Alliances and Coordination. If you're developing a product or technology within the NHLBI mission space, which covers cardiovascular, pulmonary, hematologic, or sleep disorders and diseases, please contact us through our website, our Twitter account, or by phone for additional assistance in developing your SBIR application. And if you are developing a product or a technology that is outside of the NHLBI mission space, we encourage you to please reach out to a program official in the appropriate institute at NIH for additional assistance. A list of SBIR STTR contacts for each institute and center within NIH can be found at the email address listed below. And we hope that you have enjoyed our hangout today. Thank you very much, Dr. Gary Robinson, for a fabulous job. And we look forward to seeing you again next month.
Thank you.